Such an honor and pleasure to be here with you. Yesterday was a lot of fun. You guys all grilled me with questions, and you're very well prepared. So it's just a pleasure to be here. And I understand that most of you are doing biology, studying biology. You heard about wildlife, and I just thought we could do a bit of a competition just to start with. So I'll show you a picture, and I want the first person to identify what you see to shout, and let's see who gets it right first. Right? 3, 2, 1. What do you see? Lion? Good. You got it right. Well done. So we are naturally born zoologists, I'm afraid. We see things moving. We're a bit worried about things that can jump on you and attack you. And that really comes to the cost of us not appreciating the true diversity that we have on this planet. And of course, plants are really what makes our planet so special. It gives us food, it gives us fiber, gives us building material like the wood we have here. And plants are the most incredible source of all those things that make our lives a bit better and really that make this planet so unique. But yeah, we do look at this and people see and think of wildlife as only animals, which are of course also important, but plants are consistently neglected. And I'm sure that after this whole week of talks and discussions, you all have been kind of persuaded to believe that plants are really the true thing for you in the future, and that is really correct. So I really want us to start focusing a bit more on plants and the amazing things they can give us in terms of all the benefits, but also to understand a bit what the threats are to plant diversity. So plants are absolutely incredible. We have a huge task ahead of us, and I've had the privilege as a botanist to be exploring some of the most amazing places on this planet, including many in my own home country, Brazil, such as in the Amazon, where I've taken boats to many different places where possibly no one with a scientific degree has been in the past. Of course, there's a lot of knowledge in the indigenous and traditional communities there, but that really allows us to understand what good looks like and study plants in their natural habitat, the amazing interactions they have with other organisms as well. So in those trips, you really get to see amazing things. You discover new species to science almost every day, every trip you go into the tropics. And it's just an incredible thing to do, to look at something that no one has ever documented before and really start understanding what that species could do to us and to our planet as well. So a lot of this is very hard-working. It's sweaty, it's hot, it's not very pleasant. You get stung by all kinds of things that try to kill you, but it is really a lot of fun and also very important work. And at Kew, we have scientists working more than 100 countries with our partners to really document what we have here on Earth. And the number of species that we are discovering is not anywhere near completion. So basically, every year we discover about 2,000 new plant species that are completely unknown to scientists. And those species are really everywhere. You see in this map the different colors for the different continents, and this curve is just going up. There's no sign whatsoever that the curve is actually flattening out. And in places like Madagascar, you will see lots of those species that are being discovered almost weekly. And in some groups, such as daisies, really big families, those discoveries are just awaiting because a lot of people have been avoiding the difficult groups, but it's really where we can find the most diversity of life on Earth. And we have now a much better understanding about what constitutes the rings of Saturnus or the surface of Mars than we know about life on Earth. And it's no exaggeration to say that, if you choose to go on a career as a plant scientist and you think that biodiversity is something for you, you really have a wonderful career in front of you because there's so much to do and so many discoveries to be made. So I think that not only do we start thinking about the diversity we have and what, put names on them, but of course, we have to start thinking about what those species can do. And last year, for instance, we summarized all the knowledge in different databases that we've been compiling, working with communities around the world to understand what kind of different uses those species have had. And of course, medicine is one hugely important component. Many people need those medicines on a daily basis. You can't just go to Boots to get your stuff if you're in a poor country, but also many other sources of, as I said, building material and all the other things you can see here, from food to our animals to, for instance, poison and other important traits that really help us to live our lives, and hopefully we can also use those properties to understand how to tackle some of the challenges we have in front of us. So it is just we're scratching the surface really, and it's a treasure trove to understand what those species can do to us. So if you go to a place like Madagascar, and we're fortunate to have been working there since the 1980s at Kew, we really think about diversity not only as those major organisms like baobabs and lemurs, but also the tiny things and those plants which, like orchids, have very little information about what pollinates them, and all those discoveries are really what's making us conserve that biodiversity for the future. And it is quite striking because at some point, I just started to think about the exploration of the outer universe and how to compare that to the exploration of this planet. And I think we are sometimes thinking about giving up on our planet so we can explore other worlds, but really here is our home. It's what we really have to focus on, and I think there's an incredible journey for us to make together. So I think that in a sense, there's never been a more exciting time to be a scientist. We now have technologies that no one could even think about in the past. We can now use our phones to just take a picture about something you have no idea what it is. You get a good match. Use AI, for instance, to help you identify specimens, or you can go to the Name That Plant that website, and you can start thinking about new technologies which were really inaccessible. When I started doing field work about 25 years ago, that's how old I am, I would bring a pile of books with me to really start keying out species in the tropics, and I would always get frustrated because I would never find the right name. And now we have access to information which was absolutely unthinkable just some years ago. We also have a new wave of technologies that can speed up the rate of discovery. And this is something that really is helping us, for instance, to look at the genetics and genomics of different species, and that really accelerates the rate of discovery. So it is fantastic, but it's also dreadful what's happening out there. And since I was born, we've lost about 25% of all tropical forests on the planet. And we also know that this is something that, of course, has a tremendous impact on biodiversity, on plants, because it's the main cause of biodiversity loss that we are experiencing today. So the change of how we use and manage land. And last year, we also saw the hottest year on record. So the impacts of climate change, of course, not only on our societies, but on nature, and the ability of species to survive and thrive for generations to come. We have a combination now of climate change, the change we make to our planet, and together they are causing incredible and unseen levels of destruction to the natural environment. So for instance, last year we saw the highest ever loss of tropical rainforests recorded. So about 6.7 million hectares, which is about more than 3 times the size of Wales, just to have an idea. And this is pristine environments with millions, if not billions, of both individual plants and animals that are destructed and die because of those changes. So the combination of climate change and, of course, change to land use that we are incurring today. We can think about those changes happening very far away, right? Borneo, the Amazon, but they're happening here and now. I went for a run yesterday, and those pictures I'll show you now are all within 300 to 400 meters from where we're standing here today. So this is just one image showing how cattle, so beef production as the main driver of land use, and of course excluding a huge amount of diversity which would have been here otherwise. And now we have a situation where wildlife, even if you think about wildlife as also the animals that we saw in the first image, just constituting a tiny proportion of all the biomass on the planet, about 4%, whilst what we just saw in the previous picture, all the cattle, so poultry and cows, really making up a much, much larger portion of biomass, about 60%, and then we as humans, 36%. So you see that the world is a very different place to what it was just 100 years ago, and this has gone really, really fast. We have a similar situation when it comes to plants. We have, interesting enough, for many millennia since we became humans, 300,000 years ago or so, we've always used a lot of different species to our food, a source of food, for curing different ailments. But somehow, over the last 50 or 60 years, we've gone into using a very small proportion of species to most of our consumption. So for instance, if you look at the global human population, how it's grown, and the fact that more than 40% of all the calories we consume come from just 3 species. One of them is here. What is this? Wheat. So wheat, rice, and maize are the 3 grasses which constitute a huge amount of our calorie intake. So we eat just like cows, right? Grasses. And this despite the fact that there are more than 7,000 different crop species in the world. And traditionally and locally they can be really used and provide a lot of nutrients to our health, well-being, but we're just not growing them. So we went from many to few, and that's the same for plants and for animals, which makes us incredibly vulnerable. When we had the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, the supply of wheat into many African countries was cut because several countries were really dependent on wheat rather than the amazing diversity of different crops that exist in those tropical regions. So I talked about the dependence on very few species, and I talked about climate change. And climate change, as I said, is here and now. So this is also an image from yesterday. And you see this pond, which has an amazing diversity of life, and wetlands have been really affected by use of land. It's completely dried out, right? And we also saw that these, so those are very new, new species. So basically, a couple of days ago, we saw the hottest day of this year, and June is the last month was the hottest on record since the late 1800s. So we are seeing that as we are speaking. It's not something that is in the tropics, it's far away, detached from our everyday lives, but something that is affecting us here and now. And we have also additional threats. One of the major ones are is the impact of invasive species. And is anyone able to identify what that tree is? Any guesses? Ash. Yeah, so ash trees are incredibly important in UK woodlands. But as you see, they have this slow death. And a very big proportion of all ash trees in the country are doomed by this disease caused by a fungus from Asia. And here again, it's one among many other species that are invasive, and they don't have a natural means of tackling them, because the populations or species affected have not evolved or co-evolved with those pathogens and invasive species. And we also have species which outcompete others. What is this one? Yeah, so Himalayan balsam is a species which really is outcompeting and dominating mats. So that's again just 200 meters away, and you won't see anything else. So these are just a few examples of how climate change, the conversion of environments such as natural woodlands into pastureland and invasive species are now putting many, many species at risk. And I just want to pause here and give you just a feeling for what we've been talking about. So what we have here in front of me are 10 different species, but let's ignore their particular names and think of each one of those representing 40,000 different species of plants, okay? So what we have here is 40,000 times 10, and that's the number of plant species we think we have documented so far on the planet. Most of those are flowering plants, so that's angiosperms, and that's about 360 or so species. And then we have ferns and mosses, for instance, which are not vascular. but together it's about 400,000. We at Kew, together with other scientists, we have now estimated that those threats that I just showed you in a few moments ago are posing threats to a large proportion of those. And in fact, now we have about 10, 20, 30, 40, and I'm afraid I'll have to cut this one in the middle, I think, to show that 45%, nearly half of all those species, we may have to say farewell to. They are threatened with extinction, which means that they may no longer exist when we reach the end of the century. So your children, grandchildren may no longer experience them. So it's almost half of all plant species. And we cannot choose which ones. Some of them have incredible properties that they can give us. Many legumes, for instance, are really important for giving us nutrients to the soil, as a source of food, for instance, and protein sources. And this is something which, of course, will have a drastic impact on the environment and on our lives. This is 45% of all species. That's for flowering plants, but let's say about almost half of all the plants. I was also talking about all the new species we find, all the excitement we have when we go to the field. And for those species that we're finding now, this number is actually even much higher. It goes up to 50, 60, 70, and almost 80. So 77% of all new species are threatened from day one. And this is because most of those species that are new to science, they are distributed in quite small regions, which means that we only have about 20 or so that are okay. And this is unprecedented. At no point in human history have we ever had as many species that are threatened and may no longer exist. If we're thinking about animals, the situation is quite similar. The decline in population size of animals is about 73%. And when it comes to places like Latin America, where I come from, 95% of all populations have crashed since 1970. So the situation is extremely alarming. And I think the quote that may best summarize what I'm trying to convey here is that this is the best of times to be a scientist, but also the worst of times. And there's no other profession, I believe, that can make such a difference to our world as being a biologist, and working on plants is really where I think we can make a contribution. And what do you do when you have this situation, right? I think none of us are happy. I think many of us are feeling ill about this and uncomfortable. So we have many different options. We have the option of going to the street, right? We can really show that we are not satisfied with this. We want it to change. We can get our hands dirty and start planting trees. We can really work on the ground. Or we can become siloed scientists working in this small ivory tower, just ignoring the outside world and producing papers which may or may not have any relevance. So those are extremes, of course, and there is much in between. At Kew, we have now about 900 scientists, and we're all behind a single mission, which is to understand and protect plants and fungi. And that's quite simple because that's what we think we can add value to. And we're doing this for the benefit of people and all the other species on the planet. And we really believe, and from all the scientific evidence that I've accumulated and the community of scientists around the world have done, we know that it's possible to bend the curve on biodiversity loss. When I was talking about all those species that are threatened, they can all come back, and we can save nearly all the species that are threatened because they're not extinct, they are threatened. So there is still time, and we know mechanistically it's not about wishful thinking or about a romantic view of the world. We know that it is possible, and we know what needs to be done. It's about protecting what we've got, restoring what we've destroyed, and using nature more sustainably. Those are the things that need to happen. I just want to give you some examples. So at Kew and many other organizations, we are using the power of collections. So the primary information about plants is in collections where we have specimens from hundreds of years ago, where we can both understand, their genetic variation, for instance, and that what makes, for instance, our apples look different. So it's the same species, but of course, genetic diversity is another component that is often overlooked. And we can also use genetic variation to understand why some bananas are much more resilient to another disease, like the Cavendish disease, fungal infection affecting 97% of all bananas in the world. So we have an incredible asset which is really in our collections, and where we can extract all kinds of traits and answer different questions by working on the collections. We are trying to understand how we can best support governments to identify the top priorities for conservation, right? We don't have enough money or time to protect everything, and that won't happen. So we need to put our resources where they're most needed. So we have a program at Kew called the Tropical Important Plant Areas, where we're working on identifying hundreds of different sites around the world where plants are the main focus compared to, for instance, what's called the key biodiversity areas. And there are 8 times more of those areas identified on the basis of birds than on plants, right? Even though we have 35 times more plants than birds, and we eat many more plants than birds. So plants are really important for conservation. And we're using new technologies like AI to really help us in that, because it's complex. It's really difficult to know where to put things in terms of conservation. So that's where some of the methodologies here, for instance, allow us to understand which species are threatened. If you look at ferns, we've been working in Madagascar a lot, and ferns, we thought they were all fine. And this is what this diagram shows. Those are the species, all the species of plants in Madagascar, and we thought that they were all fine based on expert assessments. When we use AI to all the species that have not yet been assessed by experts, we see that actually half of them are threatened. So we are speeding up the process of identifying species at risk and areas at risk by using new technologies, which I think is incredibly exciting. We're also seeing that oftentimes, we are wrong as humans. We are seeing that, for instance, AI helps us identify the best combination of where to protect to get the best combined outcome. And intuition is not always right. If you ask me, if you are president in a country, and we meet a lot with ministers and presidents, where should you protect? Where should you create your national park? Most people say, go to a place where there's a lot of species, right? That's intuitive. But the answer is wrong. We should go to a place which has the best complementarity to other places that are protected. So for instance, here in this graph, you show that by just protecting areas which are most diverse, for the same amount of money, you only protect between 300 and 350 species. Using this methodology, using AI, we'll protect for exactly the same amount of money, about 450 species in this particular system. And even if you ask a monkey or you randomly protect areas in a country, you're doing a better job than protecting only areas that are more diverse. So this is the kind of things where it's incredibly exciting to be using science to aid conservation on the ground. And I spend a lot of my time, a bit too much perhaps, talking to politicians, to ministers. Last week we had Brazil's environmental minister, Colombia's environmental minister, many others, and we're discussing those things because oftentimes they don't know that science and the knowledge that we get from our collections can really help them achieve the goals that countries have, without spending any more money. We're also trying to advise on how to use the knowledge about what species grow where to advise on restoration. And everyone's heard about tree planting, right? You can send money to plant trees and create forests. But which trees? So the right tree in the right place is absolutely essential. So that it benefits biodiversity, it mitigates climate change, and it helps the people in those areas as well. So that's now a standard that is used in many different areas. We can also help many countries to identify what is the best sustainable source of food. I put here 2 examples. One of them is coffee. How many of you like coffee? How many of you desperately need coffee right now? That's a sign of how boring or exciting I am. I really think that coffee is a good example of how diversity can help us get us out of this mess, basically. Coffee is threatened. It's going to disappear or drastically reduce because of climate change. But there are other species of coffee. There are 120 different species of coffee. And in the past, people were using many different species and varieties, and now we just go for Arabica and Robusta. But we've been looking at our specimens in the herbarium and found other species which were consumed more than 100 years ago in West Tropical Africa. And then we've tested them, and we found that those species like Excelsa and Liberica, they tolerate about 6 degrees warmer temperatures, and they taste even better than Arabica. But they have very low yields. So that's where breeding, and that could be either through traditional breeding or genetic editing or any techniques, may help us develop coffee systems which are more resilient, which is of course good for us when we are falling asleep at the last lecture in a long week of plant sciences, but it's also good for the producers and the people who rely on coffee production for their livelihoods and survival. The right picture here is the false banana, which is an incredible tree. It's called the tree against hunger. And it's a tree you can use all parts of. The leaves, you can use the culm to feed like a whole family for 2 weeks. You can use everything except for the banana because there's too many seeds. And it's an incredible tree. We are using it with our partners to see whether it could be planted across sub-Saharan Africa to help diversify the food systems and make them more resilient. Because this tree tolerates everything, right? It can get hot, can get dry, it won't care. So it's really a good alternative to many other crops which are very reliant on, for instance, irrigation or nutrients. So that's just one example of how we can diversify our food systems. I talked about invasive species and the ash dieback and the tree that I just found when I was running here. Last week, our researchers published a big study in Science. You may have heard the news about the natural resistance that exists in populations and how evolution is actually helping us fight that disease here in the UK. So if you start getting a sick tree, don't cut it down. Let it produce seeds, because some of those seeds might be able to survive and actually be much more resilient than its parents. So that's the kind of information that helps us by understanding the genetics and the evolution, the disease and interactions between the fungus and the plant. We can also provide some practical advice to land managers. And we're using our sites, so for instance in Madagascar, where we've been working since the 1980s, about 70 people, we're using that as living labs. So we're basically trying to develop new techniques for restoration, for conservation, food production, and using that to really showcase how this could be done at a much larger scale. Here in the UK, we have Wakehurst, which is our second site. I think Dan asked the question about Kew Gardens. How many of you have been to Wakehurst? Good. How many of you have heard about Wakehurst? A few more? Good. It's our second site, and that's where we have the seed bank. But there's also where we have a lot of technology and a lot of research being carried out to understand the interactions between pollination and ecosystem services like carbon capture and how to use land in a sustainable way. So living labs are really exciting. They don't have to be white and within walls. They can be out there in nature and help us understand how to use this knowledge across wider landscapes. I want to just mention how this whole started. That was me when I was 10 years old in Brazil. I was really nerdy. The only thing I cared about was being out in nature. I wasn't particularly in love with plants. I really liked butterflies, and I just wanted to be in nature, really. But I grew up in a place which is incredibly beautiful, at least near that. So my city was quite boring, but every holiday in the summer I would go with my family to the forest. And then I saw, this amazing diversity. I had no idea about anything, any species, anything like that. But I really felt that this is an incredible place to be and a lot of fun. All the kids would be playing on the beach and playing football, but I never danced samba, I never played football. I was really the black sheep in the family. They were trying to kick me out, and really that gave me the passion for nature. And at the same time at Kew, we started to do some global analysis, identifying where on the planet can we find most species new to science. And it turns out that one of the 33 places on the planet which we found has the highest potential of new species discovery of plants, is actually where I come from, Southeast Brazil. So, you put those two things together and you start looking at how does this look like. This is an incredible biome that very few people have heard about. How many of you have heard about the Atlantic forest? Just a tenth of you. How many of you have heard about the Amazon? All of you. So the Amazon is an amazing place. It's the biggest rainforest we have in South America. But this is the second. This is the Atlantic forest. It's one of the most biodiverse places on Earth. But it's one of the most threatened ones as well. Everything that you see in red is gone. And there's about 8% left of the Atlantic forest. And that's where about 70% of all Brazilians live. Most of them have never seen the forest because it's gone. But the small fragments that are there are absolutely incredible and diverse. So it's a hot spot. It's one of those most diverse places. It's a dark spot, so it's a lot of new species to science, and it's mostly gone. And I accepted that when I was a kid. I thought, yes, I'm really sorry to hear this, but that's how it is. But then some years ago, I decided I don't want to accept that reality, and there is an opportunity to change this. So what I did was to convince my wife and our kids to put everything we had in our family, almost all the savings, into buying rainforest in this part of the world. So we purchased 250 acres of rainforest, and we established a foundation, which Dan mentioned, and we're having this project called Araçá, which is the Atlantic Forest Research and Conservation Alliance. And the idea here is really to put all the focus of researchers, students, to understand this amazing biome, but also to use that knowledge for conservation and for restoration. And this is where it's located. This is the city of Rio de Janeiro. Everyone has heard about Rio. And just 2.5 hours away, we've created a resource in the middle of the biggest fragment. So everything here was rainforest. This is a satellite image showing everything should have been dark green, but it's not. But you see there's one big chunk of rainforest left. And right in the middle there, we created a research station, which we are going to open in a few months. After more than 2 years building a research station in the middle of the rainforest, which I don't recommend you to do. It's a lot of fun, but it's complicated. But it's succeeded. So we're very pleased to say that we now have, this is actually a quite old image from September last year. We're still trying to fly with the drone again, but it's in the middle of this amazing forest where we're discovering lots of new species of plants, but also fungi, insects. And we are starting now to just scratch the surface, and we want to do a deep dive to really understand what's there and how we can use that knowledge for then conserving the parts that are not protected yet. So it's a great place. I really hope that in your careers you'll have the chance to come in and visit and spend some time there. So there'll be a place for up to about 40 or 50 people. And also trying to build a lab, so bring the lab to the field rather than field to the lab, field samples, right? So we want to have that interaction between scientists in the UK, in Brazil, and really make it a success. We are also looking at the diversity of not only plants, the identity of the different trees, but for instance, in this case here, it's just a random tree. It's just a fig tree, actually. And you see it's a little bit bigger than others, but that's nothing really special. If you walk on the forest, you see that this is actually, it's quite big, it's nice. You can actually go in a bit inside because it's a bit hollow. It's a beautiful tree, but it's just a tree. Or is it? So we spent months climbing that tree, and we set up scaffolds. And we have poor Olivia here in the middle, who spent weeks hanging with ropes on all different branches, and we are collecting every single species on that tree, every single orchid, cactus, fern, fungus, moss, everything. We're trying to understand the full diversity of one single tree, which I don't think anyone has really done so far. If you'd like to hear a bit more, you can read her blog, so Adventures in a Fig Tree, and she wrote about her personal experience as a research assistant working at Kew, but really sharing some of the excitement that she had, but also some of the logistical challenges. If it starts raining, you're hanging there 30 meters above ground in the rainforest. It's a lot of fun, and she's very brave. I'm happy I don't have her job to be hanging there, but it's an amazing place. But we are really trying to understand now. So we basically also brought some equipment called LiDAR. You may have heard of it. It's a laser scan. So what we can do now is to have the whole tree as a scanned object. And we can now navigate around it, and we can find with millimeter precision every single species on this tree and how these species are going to move in the face of climate change. So for instance, we are hoping or expecting that species which are threatened because it's getting too hot or dry will move inwards towards the tree. And the biggest discovery we did is that it's 2 trees, it's not one. You see the second canopy coming up, which we couldn't see from below. So it's actually a fig tree on top of another tree called Sloania gherkiana. So we are really excited about the use of new technologies. And as I said, when I say it's the best of times, it is the best of times in many different ways, because it is fascinating how much information you can gather in a matter of seconds. This is a scan of a 50-meter transect of the forest. You don't have to know any names, right? Just look at that and how much information there is, right? Lots of different things, right? Different plants. We are using our AI and remote sensing to identify, how many species there could be, and then we're trying to ground truth it. So we go there and we measure, and we're trying to do that across a big landscape. We have a partnership now we're establishing with Microsoft, and we have many different collaborators trying to innovate on going from the plant taxonomy and identification of species to using those new technologies and combining that with AI. And the goal here is to create a biological corridor linking 2 of the major protected areas in this part of the country. So you see the green shaded areas here, and there is no way that species of plants or animals can cross between those 2 today. And we'd like to create a biological corridor linking the 2, and that's an area of about 200,000 hectares. It's huge. And here we like to conserve, so formally protect the fragments that are left, restore the ones that are gone, and then work with agroforestry and more sustainable food production as well. So we're just at the start of this journey, and there's much more to be followed. So just in terms of taking away, I think that hopefully this whole week of lectures and interactions will have shown you that plant sciences have never been as important or exciting. It is amazing. I really love my job. I feel a bit ashamed that I get paid to do what I do, because I would pay myself to be a plant scientist. And, it is a place where I can really make a difference. It is also very important to realize that science doesn't have to be that isolated ivory tower. You sit there and then, whatever you find has no relevance to the world. A lot of what we're doing here is to translate what we learn from science and research and how this can have a practical implication for people actually making decisions, for the environmental ministers, for the people who own land, for the big companies, and welfare people who can really help us achieve that mission. And you can make a difference. And I really mean it. So if you think hard about what your interests are and what your heart tells you, what you're passionate about, just follow your heart and you will make a difference. I'm absolutely convinced of that. Thank you.